again, for those who entered late with me, I am Rachel. I'm a senior qualitative research mentor here at Statistics Solutions. And I also have Melissa, who is with me in the background, helping me out when technical difficulties arise. So if you have questions, again, that are related to what we do here at Statistics Solutions, go ahead and, ask those during the webinar, and Melissa will be able to get those answered for you. If you have questions related to the content of today's webinar, so we're talking about qualitative results chapter, you can pop those into the questions box and I will answer those at the end. So we will have some time at the end for question and answer. So this is confidently presenting your qualitative results. Now, the list here of the components of the qualitative results chapter is really a compilation of those different sections that I see most commonly required of my clients. Okay, so the one caveat that I will say, and I will remind you of this, is you always want to defer to your school or your department's template for the qualitative results chapter. Okay, but if you need a little bit more guidance, they don't provide you with a template. If you get these sections, which I will discuss in turn, if you get each of these sections into the chapter, you are going to be good to go, okay, as far as confidently presenting your results. So starting with the introduction, then, this is where you want to, just as you've done in other chapters, restate the problem and the purpose of your study. Okay, and when I say restate the problem and the purpose, what I mean is verbatim. Everywhere else that you have stated the problem and the purpose, so your introduction chapter, and you've probably also said this in your methods chapter as well, this is verbatim, word for word. So this is not the place to kind of get creative. You might think that it sounds redundant, saying things exactly the same way every time, but that's what you'll need to do here. And the same goes for your research questions. When you remind the readers of your research questions, they need to be word for word exactly the same as everywhere else they appear in your dissertation. Okay, words, as we know, have meaning. Changing one word can, unfortunately change the meaning and perhaps implications of the research question. So you want to make sure that everything is verbatim. Okay. Then also in the introduction, just provide a little overview of the chapter and those major sections that are going to go into the chapter. So once you've done that, then there's usually a section on the setting, the research setting. And so you may have talked about this also in your methods chapter. And if that's the case, that's totally fine and normal. A couple of these early sections that you'll include in the results chapter should look familiar. Okay, and the reason for this is in your methods chapter, you are proposing a study. So you haven't conducted the study yet. Once you get to the results chapter, you're done. You're done with the study, right? Well, not totally, but you're done collecting data. Okay, so that is, the proposal is behind you. It is no longer proposed. So the setting section is sort of the what actually happened. Okay, so you want to outline where you conducted the research and why that setting was important. This is really where you want to emphasize any conditions that influence your research, your participants, your findings, how you interpret your findings or your results. Okay, this is where you talk about that. So, this might be obvious right now in the middle of a global pandemic, but perhaps what you proposed for data collection and your setting back in, say, December of 2019, well, didn't work out quite the way that you thought it was going to. And so you had to make some modifications, and that's okay. This is where you would talk about that. Okay, so you talk about the setting. You'll generally have a section on your demographics as well. So this is information about your participants, salient characteristics of your participants, okay? Not every demographic characteristic is important to your study, right? So you need to kind of parse out what is important for my readers to know and understand about my participants, such that they have the right context for the study. So maybe you're in education and you're conducting a study with veteran teachers, okay? So it's probably important that your reader knows that your participants have been teachers for, let's say, 10 to 20 years, okay? So you also want to be careful, though, that you're maintaining confidentiality. So you want to provide background information about your participants, but sort of strike a balance in not presenting so much information that someone could identify them and know who they are. Okay, so using pseudonyms can be really helpful, or participant numbers, but also just, maybe presenting like an age range or a range of years that a person has worked for a company, or instead of, if you conducted your study in like Chicago, you could say, the Midwestern United States. So things to kind of obscure a little bit. You'll also want to touch on how you collected data. And so again, this is something that you talked about in your methods chapter when you proposed your study. But here's where you talk about how data collection actually went. Okay, so things to include in this section are the number of participants who took part in your study or from whom data were collected. Okay, the location of data collection events. Okay, maybe it was, on Zoom from your home and the participant's home, but maybe you collected data a while ago and it was a private room in a library or something like that. You describe all of that here. The frequency of data collection events, you also want to touch on. How you recorded data. Okay, did you take notes? Did you audio record? Did you record, face-to-face as well if it was through Zoom? All of that needs to go into this chapter. And this is where you also talk about any variations from what you proposed to do in your methods chapter, okay? So, I see a lot of students sort of stumble at their methods chapter because there's the, well, what if things don't go according to plan? Well, this is where you get to talk about any of those variations. So it's okay, you talk about that here. If data collection didn't go exactly as you proposed, then you discuss that here, okay? Anything unusual that happened. Perhaps, again, there was a global pandemic while you were collecting your data. So that would probably be important to talk about because it may have impacted data collection for you. Data analysis is another section that I see required a lot of results chapters. And this is one where, again, I will say you want to default to your school's template, okay? Because while I do see this particular section in results chapters a lot of times, there are plenty of schools out there where data analysis is not discussed at all in the results chapter. It is only in the methods chapter. Okay, so this is one where you need to, seek clarity from your department or your school or your chair about where they want this data analysis section. But in the section, wherever it goes, based on your school, you want to talk about the data analysis process. And so when I say the process, I don't mean simply the steps, the general steps for, the coding and thematizing process, if that's what you're doing. This is where you want to describe how you applied the data analysis to your own data. Okay, so how you moved from your data to code to categories. Okay, so, you know, providing things like examples of an excerpt and a code to show, okay, this is the sentence and this is how I coded it and this is why, right? So that your reader is right with you and understands exactly how that process went. Okay, so again, it's not just that you're talking about the general data analysis, you know, oh, well, you know, I use thematic analysis and there are 6 steps. It's how did you apply those 6 steps, if that's what you're using, to your own study, to your own data. And you also want to touch in this section on how you handled any discrepant cases or negative cases. And those are instances in our data where someone doesn't quite fit the pattern, right? So, you know, you might have just a random number, 12 participants in your study, and 11 participants made statements that, you know, all sort of spoke to the same concept and the same experience, feeling maybe the same way about that experience. And then you have one other participant who had a very different sense of a given experience. So that's a discrepant case. And it's not an outlier, right? You know, it's not, I mean, in quantitative terms, we have to do something with this. So it's how do we handle those cases? And usually, you know, we do kind of factor them in and talk about them. So you'll mention that in this section, and then I'll talk more about sort of how we handle that in the results coming up. So in terms of the presentation of the results, and this is really the core piece of the results chapter. Okay, this is the main piece of it. This is what you need to present. So again, all of the other sections that I just touched on, I typically see included in the results chapter, but it might vary from school to school. But the results chapter is where you present your results. There are different ways to do that, okay? Some schools will tell you specifically how they want the results organized. Others provide greater flexibility. So, you know, this is something that you kind of have to figure out for yourself, and then with your chair, what makes the most sense in terms of presenting results, okay? So you may present your results based on the research question. Say you have 3 research questions, and so you organize your chapter to address each research question. That might make the most sense for you and your study. Or it might be how your school tells you they want to see it. Okay, but it might also be the case that it makes more sense to present your results by category or by theme. Okay, and if that's the case, then you can present that way and organize that way as well. Again, it's really just a question of, you know, unless your school tells you specifically one way to do it, you just kind of need to think through what makes the most sense for your own study in terms of presentation. When you are presenting your data, you should be aware that you're using mostly your own words, okay? So you want supporting quotes from participants, excerpts from their transcripts. If you have conducted any kind of data collection through documents or observations or anything like that, you might use excerpts from documents. You might use photographs that you've taken from observations. So there are a lot of possibilities here, but you want the chapter, you want the results to be mostly your own words and then supported by the data, okay? You discuss the data and interpret the data. And I say if appropriate, because in some cases, the discussion of the results comes in the discussion chapter, okay, and the interpretation of the results. So it oftentimes kind of gets split into two. The if appropriate, as I say here, comes in in particular types of analysis and particular qualitative designs. So if you're conducting an interpretative phenomenological analysis, an IPA, that's a particular design. It calls for a particular type of data collection and data analysis. I don't get into any of that in this webinar, but in that case, you would also provide more of an interpretation of your data in the results chapter. Okay, but usually you don't get into that level of detail and that kind of interpretation of your results in this chapter. And I always like to think of holding the reader's hand. Okay, and this really, applies to any chapter. If you've been with me in other webinars, I say this all the time, but think of this from your reader's perspective and from your reviewer's perspective, that everything needs to be clear and logical to the reader. It needs to make sense to them. So if you think of holding their hand and moving along through the chapter, sort of looking back and looking forward as you're describing the data, that should put you on a pretty good path. So I mentioned that in the data analysis section, you want to describe your plan for handling discrepant cases. And when you present the results, you also want to present the discrepant cases. So these, again, are cases that may appear to disconfirm your major findings. And that's sort of a strong word, and I don't know that it always indicates that that discrepant cases always appear to disconfirm major findings. But what they are helpful for is illuminating variations of experience and alternate explanations of experience. Okay, because if 11 people described one experience in one way and the 12th person describes it in a different way, there's some variation happening there. And, we work with people, we work with humans. Humans vary a whole lot. So that seems pretty obvious. So we discuss these cases as they come up, okay, in the results chapter. So in the context of the category, if it's, if it's a theme where most participants experienced something one way and then, a final participant did not, you would discuss that at the level of the category. So it's probably not the case that in every possible way that 12th participant differed from all the others, but it might just be in a couple of different things. And so you do want to pull that out and tease it apart in presenting your results. There are different ways to visualize findings as well. So qualitative results chapters are primarily narrative-driven, text-based, okay? But it may be appropriate to use things like tables and figures. You might use maps, okay, if that's appropriate for the context of your study. Drawings, the same if it's, again, appropriate in the context of your study. Any of these are fine. They are good to do sparingly, to use sparingly. And the main thing that you want to watch out for is that anytime you use some kind of visual representation, that you describe it in the text, in the narrative, okay? You want to avoid just popping a table in somewhere with absolutely no discussion of what it is and what it means and leave it for the reader to figure out. Because if you do that, you're not holding the reader's hand. We've already talked about how important it is to hold the reader's hand, okay? So introducing the table, okay? Maybe you have a table about participant demographics. So you say, table 1 presents participant demographics and included, and maybe just kind of broad strokes in the narrative before presenting that table. Finally, you may be asked to include a section on trustworthiness. And so again, as in your methods chapter, where you've also probably talked about this, this is where you describe how you established trustworthiness of your study, of your data. So a little bit different from how you would have proposed to establish trustworthiness. Maybe things changed a little bit, and this is where you talk about that. But those kind of key tenets of trustworthiness, credibility, transferability, dependability, and confirmability. So talking about how you established each of those, right? So did you pull from multiple data sources? Did you conduct interviews and do some kind of document collection and document analysis to triangulate your findings? Okay, or some kind of member checking, right, where you analyze your data and you have your themes or your categories, for your results, and you present those to your participants and talk to them about how well those capture their experience. Okay, so there are different ways to do this, and I apologize that this slide makes it look a little bit as though these are sort of mutually exclusive, right? That triangulation can only be used to establish credibility, and that's not the case. Okay, these are all different techniques that we can use as qualitative researchers to ensure trustworthiness. The final section will be a chapter summary. Okay, and as with other chapters, you want to paint a picture of what you found. Okay, paint a picture of those results, highlighting the key findings. Okay, so if someone didn't read the entire chapter and only had time to read the summary, what would they need to know? This is kind of the elevator speech version of your results. Okay, here are the key findings, right? And then you want to transition to and preview the next chapter. So again, it's the looking forward and looking back as well, back at what those key findings were, and then forward to the next chapter, continuing to hold the reader's hand as you move through. So like I said, if you, again, always defer to your chair or department or school and their template for what they want in your results chapter. But if you get these sections in here, you will be really, really well set up for your chapter 4, your results chapter. But my sense is that some of you are maybe not looking for sort of the what sections go into the chapter 4 help. Okay. And so I do have some advice in this area as well, because the sections are important, but the results chapter is a little bit different from what you have written before, okay, for a couple of reasons. But you are no longer proposing a study. You have already collected data, okay? So whereas the proposal is going to require of you more in the way of research and reading and writing, your results chapter looks different. The other challenge that I think happens to students at this stage is you may have gone, I'm not saying this is any of you, but you may have gone a little while between writing the proposal and then collecting data and then writing the results chapter. Okay, this was certainly the case for me based, when I was working on my dissertation, it took me several years, and part of that was the nature of my program and the discipline that I come from, where things do take a little bit longer, but it was several years. And so I was out of the habit of writing, okay? And I think that happens to a lot of students as well. So my tips for getting back in the habit and getting the results chapter knocked out are, you have all of these sections now that we've just talked about, everything that needs to go into the results chapter, but you are the boss of you, and you don't have to start at the beginning. Okay, I give you permission, in case you feel like you need it, to start wherever you want in this chapter. You do not have to sit down and start with the introduction. Okay, for some of you, it might be a little bit easier to start with the introduction because it does provide sort of a roadmap. And if that's you, go ahead and do it. But if it's not, that's perfectly fine too. I am someone who works better writing sort of the content and then going back to the introduction and conclusion once I have all of the content in place. So if that's you, then you can jump into any other section that you want, okay? The other thing that I recommend is, you know, if you feel really good, if you've got that sort of, you know, motivated upswing and you're feeling awesome and like you want to tackle something big, dive right into the results. Go for it. You know, if you're ready to write up a theme and you're feeling good, do it. Okay, but sometimes that can look really overwhelming. So if you need to go for the low-hanging fruit, that's okay too. So you can start small. If you want to start on that demographic section, okay, maybe making a table of participant demographics, okay, something that you can do while you're, you know, like watching TV or something. You know, it doesn't take up like a lot of brain power, but it needs to get done. You can start there as well and kind of let that momentum like snowball, right? Because you've already gotten something out of the way. So anything you do at this point, you are moving closer to the mountain, and that's the goal. Okay, so start small, start big. You don't have to start at the beginning. The other thing that I would encourage is not to discount the importance of things like brainstorming and free writing. And 15 minutes a day, I tell you what, you can generate so many words if you are able to just go to a relatively quiet place, put your phone on do not disturb, tell your children do not disturb, you know, wherever that space is for you. And it can be on the computer, it can be on a laptop, it can be on, you know, a piece of paper and pencil, and just let yourself do some free writing about your topic and about your results. I think that we have a tendency as academics to censor ourselves. If it's not perfect the first time, we don't even want to put our pen to paper, so to speak. Allow yourself to write free without censoring yourself. Don't worry about spelling, don't worry about grammar, don't worry about punctuation. Write your thoughts about your research, about your results, about your topic, okay? Some of it might be absolute garbage. That's okay, but some of it might be really good and can later on be incorporated into your results chapter and what you're writing. So if you're really stuck, just let yourself write. Give yourself permission to write without any worry. This is not the time to be a perfectionist, okay? So you can get a lot written in 15 minutes a day, and some of it will be useful. If you're still stuck, that's why we're here. Okay. Again, I'm Rachel. I'm a senior qualitative research mentor here at Statistics Solutions, and we're full service dissertation consulting company. So we are here to help you get through this process in a timely manner. Okay. You've already spent enough of your life on your dissertation. It's time to get done, right? That's where we come in. We provide support at all stages of the dissertation journey. If you are, you know, looking for a little help with topic development, we're here. If you want a hand with your final PowerPoint for your dissertation defense at the end of it, we're here. And we're here for everything in between. So what I encourage you to do is, in the chat, I know there's a link, you can schedule a complimentary consultation. Okay, that is to get to know you a little bit better, get to know your dissertation project and research a little bit better, figure out how we can help support you to get you done and moving on with your life. So our contact information is available here. You can email us. Again, you can schedule, you can self-schedule on the website using the link in the chat. You can give us a call if you want to do that. This webinar will be available, believe sent out to participants and attendees tomorrow. You'll also get a copy of the slide deck as well. Our other webinars are available on our website as well. So you can find those recordings as well as check out our suite of upcoming webinars on all chapters of the dissertation, and then also in terms of quantitative and qualitative methods. And then we have all kinds of other goodies for you on our website as well, statisticsolutions.com. You know, if you can think of it, and if it's a question that we've been asked, and we've been asked a lot, you know, we've got information about it on our website. So we do have time for questions and answers at this point. So I don't see any that have come in related to the webinar, but if there are questions about the content of the webinar today, so the qualitative results chapter, go ahead and put those into the questions box and I will get those answered so that everyone can hear. I don't see any questions coming in. Go ahead, if you have them, go ahead and pop those into the question and answer box. I'll get those answered. Okay. It looks like there is one question. Yeah, go ahead and use the question and answer box for any questions coming in, so that I make sure that I see those. I do have a question about, can you use maps to highlight where your participants are from? And I think that, you know, yes, you can, but you want to think about, is it giving too much information away before you do it? So if it's going to be really obvious, you know, who those participants are based on the map, then I wouldn't necessarily go that route. We also have another question. In the presentation of results, can you write up your results both by research question and by theme? Like if you have results to answer your research question and then you have other themes that you discovered, yes, you can. You can, you know, kind of, yeah, blend it. There are different ways to do it. There's no sort of hard and fast rule about how to organize the presentation. Other questions that I could answer this afternoon? All right. Well, thanks for joining me this afternoon. Again, you will get a copy of the recording as well as the slides no later than tomorrow. So you'll have that refer to. And then it'll also be available on our website, and there are other webinar recordings in there. Okay, so take care, happy writing. Hope you feel empowered to go ahead and get your results chapter finished up. Good luck. Bye-bye.